All right, so we're joined from College Park, Maryland, by my friend Leah Boston, owner of Leah Boston Law there in College Park. We thank you so much for joining us. This is our business law class. We've got a room full here with me at Velma Jackson High School, and we're recording this for all of our friends in Madison County Schools, Madison Central High School, Ridgeland High School, Germantown High School, the Academic Options Center, my good friend Jennifer Coate over there, my good friend April Majors at Ridgeland High, and our YouTube channel. So thank you so much for taking some time for us today to talk about this important topic.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Now, obviously, we're going to talk about estate planning because you do specialize in estate planning, which is such an overlooked issue for young people as they start to transition from high school. But just give us a little background. You're originally from Florida, went to Florida State University, and then spent a good amount of time working at Disney. So just take us through your educational background and how it led you to go to law school in Houston.
Yeah, so I've kind of been a little bit of everywhere, at least as far as the South goes. So yeah, I'm from Florida and I went to Florida State University. There was no other university for me. My family has a background at University of South Florida, but I'm kind of one of those individuals that likes to break the mold. So I went off to Florida State. Honestly, I like the way the campus looked. It reminded me of Hogwarts. Any Harry Potter fans out there? So the landscaping was beautiful. That was like my only tour that I went on, and I'm like, I'm sold. So, Florida State, I had a wonderful time there. I majored in psychology, so follow my roadmap here.
Psychology.
I
So
majored
follow
in
my roadmap
psychology,
here.
and
I majored in psychology and
I also played
I
rugby as
also
an
played
undergrad. Is
rugby
there an
as an
echo?
undergrad. Is there an echo? Yeah, it was a little delay.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now? Yep.
Okay. So I played rugby in undergrad.
Played
That was an
rugby in
amazing
undergrad. That
time.
was an
Kind of one of
amazing
my
time. Kind of one
extracurriculars
of
that
my
I did.
extracurriculars that I
And
did.
from
From
undergrad, I took a
undergrad,
gap
I took
year.
a
So
gap
it's
year.
okay to
So
not just jump into something immediately after undergrad. Sometimes you just need some time to, figure out what you want to do, get some other hobbies or interests in. So I took a gap year after Florida State and I worked at Disney World. So Disney was one of my fun jobs that I'm like, okay, so I always loved Disney and I feel like I have a really good background in communication, but also I love the atmosphere of meeting other people. And I don't know if you know, but Disney is very internationally based. So, although it's based in Florida and we have California, there's a big international culture that's at Disney. And one of the things that I learned from Florida State was the importance of being culturally competent. And Florida State really drove that path for me to Disney, I feel like on accident, but kind of purposeful. So at Disney, I end up getting my master's degree. So I end up going to school also while I was working at Disney to get a master's in public health. And I kind of just knew I was going to go into the direction of hospital administration because I had such an interest in maternal mortality, particularly amongst Black women. And from there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take my classes in my master's program. And I was actually introduced to one of my health law professors. And from there, I kind of went to law school because I had such a passion for my health law class. And I'm like, how can I make a difference? Because I feel like the trajectory that I'm on right now is more research based, but I'm more of a hands on active person. And I felt like the legal route could offer me the opportunity to be more hands-on instead of like in a lab crunching numbers, epidemiology, biostats. So that's kind of my health law class actually led me to law school. And then my honest pick for Thurgood Marshall School of Law in Texas Southern was just the amount of Black women judges that they were like pushing out. Like that school was essentially known for pushing out very well educated, powerful Black women in law. And I was sold on that. And that's how I ended up in Houston, Texas.
Yeah. Now, after you graduated from law school at Texas Southern, you moved to the DMV where you are now in College Park, Maryland, and opened your own law practice. Now, like I was talking before before you came on, you're an attorney, you own a law practice, but there is such a misconception of what attorneys do. We all watch the courtroom dramas. My parents were big Law and Order fans. I was a big fan of All Rise. But that is such a minuscule amount of the actual legal field, and it is nothing has nothing to do with what you do. You're not. If somebody came to you because they got arrested, you would say, "Well, you're gonna have to go talk to somebody else." That's really not my area. So, but what you do is so important, especially rural communities have really not been educated and taught about what estate planning is, because we hear estate planning, we think celebrities, we think they're multi-million dollar uh, prenuptial agreements. We think this is what Donald Trump has at Mar-a-Lago for his multi-billion dollar house. This is what Jay-Z and Beyonce have. But this is something that affects everybody. Whether it could be something of you being medically incapacitated, blended families being married, and we had a guest earlier this week who said she'd been a judge. And she said some of the nastiest courtroom fights she ever saw was when grandma died and somebody said, "Well, she said I could have this." No, she said I could have this. And there was nothing in paper that said it happened. And families literally fell apart because estate planning was not taken care of while the person was still alive. So please let us know what all estate planning does and why it is so important, especially for people that want to be married and have families and own businesses and own land. Why estate planning is so important to take care of as soon as you have attained these things.
Yeah, and I love that you've done your research and you kind of get you hit the nail on the head, a little bit of a background about it. And I'm just going to throw a statistic at you. So, I believe when I was searching, because when we think of lawyers, we think of Law and Order, we think of criminal defense, or we think of the other side, which is the prosecutor. And even at my law school, it really was a big push for being in that sector of criminal defense or criminal prosecution. And as I stated earlier, I'm kind of one to break the mold. So I don't want to go where the majority of the atmosphere or the majority of the band is going. So, in regards to estate planning, particularly when we think about law, only about 16% of the entire population is going to have an encounter with the criminal justice system that's going to need them to hire an attorney, whether that be on the prosecution side going against them or the criminal defense side, which is vouching for them and advocating for them. However, 100% of us are going to die. So, I mean, and that's what it is. And I want to normalize that. Like less than 50% of the population is going to need a criminal defense attorney. But 100% of the population needs an estate planning attorney. And I feel like it's my job as an estate planning attorney and all of us out here who are practicing estate planning law to really push the importance of it, because it is something that is inevitable. It is something that is going to affect us. We may not all the time become incapacitated, but we will at some point leave this earth. And what is the direction that we're going to leave for our loved ones when we leave this earth? So that's why estate planning is so important, because the lack of a plan, essentially, what is that quote by Benjamin Franklin? Failure to plan is a plan to fail, something like that. And the biggest obstacle, as you stated, was when families are now torn apart because of something like this. Something like your mom told you that she wanted you to have the house, but your brothers and sisters are fighting you for it. Or we're losing our generational wealth because we didn't write something down, and now our property is held up in the probate courts. Or we have like 14 plus people that own this one piece of house and there's no clear title to it, which is also called heirs property, which actually negatively affects the African American community, because if we don't plan an estate, that property, if we have, like, say, for example, 8 children and 4 of the children are passed away, but they have grandchildren, and now you have cousins, aunts, niece owning one piece of property, and the government doesn't really know who owns this property. So, say, for example, individuals that want to qualify for these different government grants that allow us to be able to exemplify or augment our property. So being that there's no clear title, now the government can say, well, we won't give you this grant, or we won't give you grants to be able to, beautify this land, or be able to, refinance things like that. So things that other communities are able to take care of because they have proper legal documents in place is exactly why I went into this, because there is a big gap between our counterparts and us not taking part in estate planning. And I think when we normalize it, when we talk to people and say, this isn't something that is only safe for the rich. If you have a shirt on your back and a car and clothes, it has to go somewhere. So for that reason, you need an estate plan. And I do want to touch on something very quickly. As you stated, the transition from high school to college, you can start estate planning at the age of 18. So if you're competent, which means you know what's going on, you know what's around you, you know who your family is, who you want your things to go to, you can do estate planning. So
Wow. Yeah, and it also has to do with businesses. And just a couple quick scenarios. My dentist, who was actually my cousin a few years ago, had a practice here in Jackson, and unfortunately, he got cancer and passed away within weeks. It was an extremely sad situation. And my first thought was, what about all those people that work for him? So then I come to find out he had done estate planning. His practice was bought by a local franchise. Everybody kept their job. So nobody wound up being out of work because he had taken care of the paperwork ahead of time. If something happens to me, um, people aren't going to be out of work and we're going to stay, the practice is going to stay in business. And then right before you came on, I was talking about my own family. My mother, unfortunately, lost her husband in 2015 to cancer. And she has two kids. He had two kids from his previous marriage. Now, they had a prenuptial agreement. It was not, oh, you're going to cheat on me, and if you cheat on me, I'm taking everything. It was to plan to make sure there was no controversy because she didn't want, neither one of them wanted, if one of them passed away, neither one of them wanted children fighting in court over property that they said belongs to someone. So, unfortunately, he did pass away, but there was a prenuptial agreement in place that, look, if I pass away, my children get this, your children get this. So there was never going to be any controversy.
yeah, so that goes into, succession planning, where as far as the business goes, like you have to put things in place. What's going to happen to your employees? Is your business going to keep going past you? Is your digital footprint? Do you want people to be able to use the likeness of your image? All of this stuff falls into putting together legal documents drafted by an estate planning attorney to kind of have these conversations. And I think what I'm learning is you don't know what you don't know. And I tell people all the time, it's my job to know it, and it's my job to tell you, and it's my job to counsel you. So I'm not going to fault anyone for not knowing it. I think it's my job to bring that information to you. And then you can decide from there. Because I think an informed community is an educated community, and an informed community will make informed decisions. And usually those decisions are very positive, and they have positive effects. So just little scenarios like what's going to happen to my employees, what's going to happen to my business, what's going to happen to my image on the internet, because a lot of people now in this day and age, they have a digital footprint. Do you want your videos to keep going? Do you want your videos to stay down? Do you want companies to be able to use your images? Like these are all things when you come into my office or just any estate planning office that we have these conversations. And that's what's called business succession planning, which is an integral part in estate planning. And I think now, especially since the pandemic, there's been an uprise in people starting their own businesses. And with that comes succession planning. You may not know, but let's talk about it. Like what's going to happen? Do you want a relative to keep going with the business, or do you want to shut it down? And as far as like blended families, oh, they're one of the most important groups of family dynamics that I believe need an estate plan. I actually recently did a video talking about blended families and accidentally disinheriting your family because you may be on your second or third marriage. So the intestacy rule, so that's what's called dying without an estate plan, doesn't really account for the family that we see today. The intestacy rules are kind of taken from the nuclear family, which is two-parent households from two same parents with the same children, no outside dealings, etc. And the problem with that is it doesn't talk about possibly stepchildren. And it doesn't talk about families that you previously were engaged in but are not, you know. And then also a big thing is being separated from your spouse but not fully divorced, and you're dating your long-term partner, something happens to you, your long-term partner has no say because you're still married. So these are different scenarios that people don't really think about, you know. But like I said, it's not your job to think about it. It's my job to teach you and to tell you. And if you're informed, you can now make the proper decisions on how to protect your family, to protect your things, your assets, even your pets. I just did a
Oh yeah.
thing about that, about pets. So everything that you have legal ownership of has to go somewhere. There needs to be a plan with it. So I think
Yeah,
I
and you
think a
mentioned,
state is one of the most important areas of law. Like I said, just because 100% of us are going to.
yeah, and it's so overlooked. And you mentioned something about you don't know what you don't know. And look, I'll be the first person to tell you that for decades, in Mississippi and all rural areas across America, especially rural black communities, they were not educated on these type things. It's not our kids' fault that their grandparents were never educated on a state law. But it's important to, I said, look, y'all need to have this conversation with your parents. Have this conversation with your grandparents. There's tons of people like yourself that are out here to help you. And I think for a long time, like we mentioned, in rural communities, they hear attorney, they automatically freeze up and say, oh, they're just trying to take all my money and I'm gonna have to go to jail. That is not what estate planning attorneys do. They're here to help. And I mean, people say they don't want to pay attorneys. So I'm like, well, do you want to pay an attorney or do you want to pay 10 times as much over time because you didn't take care of the paperwork in the first place?
Or even from that standpoint, just piggybacking off of that, it's like, you don't want to pay an estate planning attorney. However, now let's talk about your biggest asset that's now lost, and that's priceless. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I feel like the work that I'm doing is priceless because it's my goal is to keep your things together. My goal is to keep your family intact. My goal is to preserve your wealth for generations to come. I think about something random. So one of my, I guess I have this thing about leaving a legacy beyond me, and maybe that's what got my interest in estate planning. But I think of it as also like beekeeping. So I don't know if you looked around my profile, but I am very interested in bees particularly. And an interesting fact about bees and an interesting fact about honey is that honey has the ability to be preserved over like thousands of years.
Yes.
So you can find honey in like Egypt from like 3,000 years ago that has been able to sustain itself and sustain the amount of time to test of time, you know? So I think all of this works in tandem, whether it's having honey that's 1,000 years old or having generational wealth that's been preserved since 1857 or 1902, and you're now in 20 or 50, 30, you know what I'm saying? All because there's been an intentional planning on your end and your family's end, and embedding that in your generations to come. It is important that we keep this legacy because like we'll look on like a water bottle or something like that and it'll be like Heinz since like 1864, and it's just like I think it's time for our community to wake up so we can be those types of families, you know? Like I want to leave a legacy that's long after me, just like bees are leaving honey long after them. The life of a bee is maybe 4 to 6 weeks, but their honey can preserve itself for thousands of years. And I think that's the mindset that we as a community, we need to have the same as bees. Like what I'm doing now, let that work speak for me thousands of years later, hopefully. And I think if we all have that type of mindset and use estate planning for that concept, because that's what it can be used for. And that's what these families are doing. So that's why it's important for me as myself to come back to my community. Hey, look what these people are doing. We can do the same thing. I went to school, got the education so I can help my people. And
There you
so,
go.
yes, you're right. When we think of lawyers, it's not just all big and bad. No, some of us are really out here trying to sustain a legacy that goes well beyond our years.
Yeah, and just remind me, I got a friend in Indiana that's big into bees as well. I got to get y'all in contact because she's a bee queen. It's crazy. But
I love
one thing I
to hear
also wanted
that.
but one thing I wanted to talk about too is because on top of this, you are an entrepreneur. I have so many kids that say, I want to be an entrepreneur because I want to be my own boss. I want to set my own hours. And they listen to the Jasmine Sullivan song, I'm going to move to Atlanta and I'm going to open my business and be rich. And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. So you when you after you became, it's really cool that as soon as you became an attorney, you immediately open your own practice. That doesn't always happen. And there are people that are great attorneys that are horrible at running their own practice. And there are people that are great at running a practice that aren't very good attorneys too, but that's a whole different conversation. So, when it comes to being an entrepreneur, because obviously you've got the law stuff down pat, there's still a learning curve when it comes to running a business. I always tell this quick story too. There's a friend of this class that's a doctor, and she's the only black GI doctor in the state of Mississippi. And she said, I went to medical school. I learned how to take care of all types of diseases. I cured all types of people. I opened my own business and I had no idea what I was doing. So, what type of learning curve is there when it comes to running a business? Because it's not just let me post on Instagram that I've opened my business and everybody come in and I make a bunch of money.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you asked. I always knew that I wanted to have my own law firm. I will say I opened it a lot faster than I expected, but I'm so grateful and I wouldn't change a thing. As far as the learning curve goes, I think that someone like me who is very transparent, I think a lot of people don't do this. I think, especially in the legal field, I think a lot of people are scared to take that risk because being an entrepreneur isn't pretty. Being an entrepreneur doesn't mean that I'm going to open up my law firm and have 100 clients at my door and I'm going to be paid every week, you know? So being an entrepreneur means taking a risk on yourself. And if you're not ready to take that risk on yourself, but also if you're not ready to like get it out the mud, get it out like from the mud, the ground up, then it may not be for you, and that's okay. But I will say, although sometimes I do make it look glamorous, and I hope I'm making it look glamorous, it's a very humbling thing. Opening up my law firm was one of the most humbling things that I've ever had to do because I'm essentially chasing the client, essentially, and I don't mean like chasing literally. I mean as in like I took a chance leaving Texas, moving across the country, opening up a law firm in an area where I didn't go to law school. I don't really have any connections, and I'm building it from ground zero, honestly, negative ground zero up. And the most humbling part has been really putting myself out there. And I want to say for people who do want to go into this entrepreneur life, don't be afraid of putting yourself out there. Don't be afraid of posting the content, whatever content it may be, because that's how people are going to get to know who you are. But you also want to be real with yourself that you may not get that client until maybe a year out. You may not get that client or may not get the perfect client until 5 years out. So I think if you're willing to wait, be patient, and have some sort of delayed gratification, you know that the mindset that you have now is going to open doors for you and be on a trajectory where it's like, okay, big picture. And I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to be big picture because it isn't glamorous and it isn't gratifying immediately. Because some of my classmates went off to big corporate law firms and they're making six figures plus. That's not me. It's not. I have to work for that. I know I'll get to that point and am getting to that point, but if you can be humble, you can be okay with a delayed gratification mindset and know that you are working towards the bigger picture. Yeah, once you've reached the end or you've reached that, that ceiling where now you got to surpass that ceiling, it's all good. But transparency wise, I think I'm a good person to have gone on this journey because a lot of people that are coming behind me, they want the truth and they want transparency. And a lot of law firm owners, Some of them may not be willing to tell you the hard part. Some of them may not be willing to tell you, I went an entire month without clients, or I went 3 months without my phone ringing. And I'm always going to be transparent. And one of those things is, yeah, it's a learning curve. It's really hard trying to balance a business, which is not the same as practicing law. Because you got to talk about marketing, you got to talk about your software, you got to talk about how you're going to get your clients, how you're going to close. It's also like being a salesperson almost. And it's like, I didn't sign up to be a salesperson, I signed up to be a lawyer, you know? So I think being flexible is the biggest thing as well. Humility, flexibility, long term thinking, and delayed gratification.
Yeah, and I think your experience at Disney working face to face with customers had a huge impact on that. And that's why I always tell kids, you work in these face to face jobs, that's where you practice your skills to be a professional. Um, you know, Being able to sell anything is even if you don't want me, obviously if you don't, everybody can't be an attorney, but if you can sell something, you'll always have a job and you can always have a business. Um, the last thing I want to talk about before I get to their questions, one of the last things is if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to meet with an attorney before you ever open on that as well. And we had a business attorney a few weeks ago, and she talked about that and how, yeah, it's going to cost you a little bit up front, but the amount of money it can save you over time is astronomical. So just talk just real briefly about some of the things that you'd have to have in a row legally before you ever open the doors.
Yeah, so particularly for my area of practice or just having a business in general, especially for licensed individuals, you always want to have an LLC or a sole proprietorship, any sort of legal entity that the Secretary of State is going to be able to identify that you are a business, you're able to legally accept money from people, and that's definitely the first things that you want to do. As far as a law firm goes, you have to have insurance, because when we start going into these higher levels of practice or these higher level careers where you have the ability to really hurt people, whether physically or emotionally, you need to have some sort of malpractice insurance. So that's definitely one of the first two things. You need to make sure that you have an LLC. That way, the state can legally recognize you as a good standing business. If you're going the legal or professional license route, you should always have malpractice insurance to not only protect others, but to protect yourself. Another thing is operating accounts. You want to make sure that the money that you're sending to people is not going into your personal account. It needs to go into your business account, because that is telling people that I am operating not as a singular person, but I am operating as a professional. So I have an operating account and also an operating agreement. An operating agreement is essentially you're saying that this is my business. These are the shareholders. If it's more than one, this is how the business is to be operated. This is the percentage of shares that each person has, whether it's 100% or 50% if it's two people. And this is how the breakdown is going to go. So basically, your operating agreement is going to be kind of your roadmap to let others know this is a legal entity that we are operating, and these are the rules. So you want to make sure, like I said, you have a entity that is recognized by the state. You want to make sure, if you're in one of these professional atmospheres, insurance to protect yourself and to protect your employees, an operating agreement to show direction to others outside looking in, and also an operating account so people don't feel like you're stealing from them.
Absolutely. Well, they've handed me some great questions, but one thing I did want to talk about real briefly is this is a field that desperately needs diversity. And this is a field that needs people that can speak multiple languages. So we have a lot of first generation Americans in our school district. So people are always looking for a Spanish speaking attorney. People are always looking for a attorney that can sign and communicate with hearing impaired. So how important is it, first of all, if you are already bilingual, to consider consider becoming an attorney? And if you are wanting to become an attorney, how useful could it be to be bilingual?
Oh my goodness. Wow. So I'm glad you brought that up. That is at least so DC is very interesting. So I practice in the state of Maryland. However, I live in Washington District of Columbia. And I don't know if you all know this, but the of Columbia is a very big community for the deaf and hard of hearing. So Gallaudet University hosts a lot of students and also a whole community of individuals that do American Sign Language. And I myself, unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish fluently. I did take it in college and in elementary, like all throughout school, but I wouldn't count myself as bilingual. However, I do feel that if you're coming up and you have any sort of language other than English, I believe that you are an asset. Just because, as much as they don't want to admit it, the United States is a melting pot. It's diverse of different people, races, languages, and to be an individual that can speak multiple languages means that you can meet someone where I possibly couldn't or the next person couldn't. And some people feel comfortable speaking in their native language. Some people don't want to have to speak English. And I actually have ran into that in my own practice where people have asked me for my pamphlets in another language, which lets me know that's something that I need to consider. That's something that I believe is important because just because you don't speak English doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to have access to resources. So individuals that are coming up, or even people, the kids in your classroom, if you speak another language, you are an asset, and you definitely should be thinking about areas and avenues where you can use that to your advantage because it does set you apart from someone who doesn't speak who only speaks one language and is what I think maybe like monolingual as opposed to bilingual. So I definitely think that I look at it as an asset. And for me, if I have someone that speaks another language wanting to come to my law firm, come with me because I get a lot of Spanish speaking individuals that will come to my table and will ask for pamphlets in Spanish. So I think it's an asset and it's a wonderful thing. If you're able to do it, use it, especially in this climate. Use it. And don't be
Yeah.
ashamed either. Don't be ashamed.
And both of my sisters have learned to sign, and it's incredible. They didn't start doing it until they were
It's a
in
beautiful
college,
language.
and they both are basically bilingual with English and American Sign Language, and they're going to be dentists, so they're going to be able to have deaf and hard of hearing clients for the life of their business once they get into business because they took it upon themselves to learn sign language, and it really is remarkable.
It's a wonderful language, and it's so funny just being here in DC. I will just see random people on the streets just signing to each other, and it's such a it's something that I didn't see living in Florida and living in Houston. That's why I think it's so important to just live in different places because you kind of get forced into other people's cultures, which like I said, being culturally competent is so important. And if you have the ability to go other places, meet other people and invest and also, dive into other cultures, you should take that opportunity. But American Sign Language is beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, I do have some questions, and these are really good. I'm glad they're thinking about this. This is Zayden Reed. She's in ninth grade, and she asked, if I came to you and asked for details about other beneficiaries in a will, what would you be able to tell me?
So details about other beneficiaries in a will. So I think what I'm understanding is they want to know if they came to me and they wanted to know about other beneficiaries in a will that they put together. I'm just gonna assume that. So
Hey, is it?
if you come
Let me clarify. All right, she's saying if she was a beneficiary of someone else, what other information could she get from about it?
Yeah, so if you're a beneficiary in a will, so obviously a will does not become activated, let's say that, until the person dies. So let's say, for example, if the person is alive, I would have a attorney-client confidentiality duty if she were a beneficiary coming to me, or if she knew she was a beneficiary and that individual was still alive. I have a duty to my client. Unfortunately, I couldn't say anything. So, because in law, when you sign on with the client, or even sometimes when you don't sign on with the client, attorneys are bound by the rule of confidentiality. So, any of my clients, unless that client gives me the permission to share with the beneficiaries, I would be legally bound to, I couldn't give any information. So, attorney client privilege kind of ethically makes me have to shut my mouth. But as far as being a beneficiary in a will that's being probated, the will actually will be public record. So the beneficiary could come to court, or the beneficiary, once the will is read, would get all the information that they needed. But while that person is alive, I am always on the default bound by the rules of silence. So I wouldn't be able to say anything
Love it.
unless the client gave me permission.
I like this one. This is Levon Johnson. He's in 10th grade. And he asked, what's the biggest mistake you've seen someone make when it comes to their estate plan?
The biggest mistake that I have seen is not having an estate plan. That is the biggest mistake, because you die and now the family's already grieving, and or the family's arguing, or you end up losing everything, or your family ends up losing everything. So that is the biggest mistake in estate planning, not having an estate plan. Or the biggest mistake that I've seen people make when estate planning is doing it themselves. Yeah.
Ooh, great one.
Yeah.
I like this one. This is Kamani Wright.
Question.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is Kamani Wright. He's in 9th grade, one of our state runner-up powerlifters. And he asked, what are the biggest pros and cons of being an attorney?
Oh, I love that question. Also, I love that. Weightlifting. Amazing. Keep that up. Biggest pro. Oh, wow. I would say the biggest pro, and this may sound funny, but when I tell people I'm an attorney, it kind of turns into a no nonsense. Like, I'm not to be played with. So I think that is, on the fun side, I would say that's one of the biggest pros. But in professional wise, the biggest pro is the signing ceremony. When I'm done with an estate plan and the client comes to my office and we're signing everything, and sometimes I get like the biggest hugs, and I'm able to bring little treats for my clients, like congratulations, you just made one of the best decisions for yourself and your family. And yeah, that is like the biggest pro. Being able to say, yeah, I'm an attorney, but also being able to have that final signing execution ceremony is just wonderful. You can't beat that feeling. A con. I guess one of the biggest cons would be the bar exam to get to being an attorney, because that was really, really hard. And also dealing with, I would say, dealing with clients who won't listen to you or won't listen to me. So I'm trying to help you and they just don't want to listen. And sometimes for professional differences, I may have to let that client go. And I'm always sad to see someone go, just because I know what I bring and I know what I offer to the table. But if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. But that is sometimes really sad.
I got time for one more, and I love this question. This is Rondell Ellis. He's in 10th grade, and he asked, if I was already married and then we wanted to have a new estate, how would the estate be affected with the new person in the marriage?
Okay, so if you were married and then you got married again, or if you
Oh,
were married.
if you were single, you have an estate plan, then you're married, how does that change everything?
Yes, so it does change a little bit of things. So here in Maryland, we operate out of a separate property community, but in Texas, it's a community property. So I'll be speaking for Maryland. So for Maryland, if you are married and if you're single and then you become married, everything that you own before the marriage is considered yours. However, when you do get married and you do start estate planning, everything that you've now accumulated during the marriage becomes the property of you and your spouse. So now, when we're doing our estate planning, we're kind of doing a joint estate plan per se. And especially now that we add children to it, we have to start doing documents like particularly powers of attorney. But usually nothing drastically changes except what your ownership is. So when I say ownership, I mean if you had a house prior to your marriage, you still get to keep that house and that house is yours. But what the biggest thing that's going to change with the estate planning portion is just your ownership, what you share. But that is marriage, sharing.
Yeah, now we're almost out of time, and we thank you so much for taking some time for us. This is one of the most informative ones we've ever had, and I learned a lot today. But a couple things before we go. You're also you started content creation, so tell us where your YouTube channel is. You're a great social media follower where we can see all your videos.
Yeah, so I'm on YouTube. I post daily, or at least I try to post daily. You can find me at Leah Boston Law. And if you're on Instagram, you can also find me at Leah Boston Law. And I'm on TikTok, Leah and Anneesq. So definitely, if you would like to find me on YouTube for sure, Leah Boston Law is that channel. And I post a lot of formally informal things, but I like to keep the community informed. So if you're interested in this topic, or even if you're not interested in this topic, subscribe to my channel because I'm putting out stuff that you do need to know.
Absolutely. Now, the last thing before we go, and I agree that, like you just said, these are things you need to know. So, as these kids get ready to transition, whether it be the workforce or college or opening a business or the military, why is this something, because, I know how teenagers are. Me and you were both of them at one point. They say, well, this is stupid. I'm never going to need this. But then when it's too late is when they want to pay attention to it. So, why is it so important to be familiar with these issues as soon as possible?
Well, the biggest thing is when you turn 18, you should have a conversation with your parents because legally, when you turn 18, the law recognizes you as an individual, which means you go off to school, you go off to a job, or you just go off in general, wherever that may be, to chase your dreams. If something happens to you and you end up in the hospital, say for example you don't have a HIPAA authorization signed, which HIPAA is the law that allows doctors to share your confidential information with other people. So you've gone off to school, something happens to you, your parents want to know what's going on with you. The doctors may not be apt to sharing your information with your parents if you're unable to communicate with them. Another scenario is going out of the country and your parents not being able to have access to your bank accounts if you don't have access to your bank accounts, because now that you're 18, you have to put something in place that tells third parties, either creditors or banks, this person is allowed to go into my bank accounts and contract for me or do things for me. So one of the things I want to leave with all of you is as you turn 18, the four documents that you're going to need before you go off to school, because I know as an 18-year-old, although the law recognized me as an adult, I still needed my parents. So you are going to need a durable power of attorney. This document is going to allow your parents or a person that you choose to contract to have access to your financial documents. You're going to need a HIPAA authorization. Like I stated earlier, if something happens to you and your parents or your loved ones want to check on you in the hospital, this document allows them to do it because you've now given them permission. You need a living will for whatever reason. If you are in a coma or if you are on feeding tubes and you don't want to be on that and your parents want to keep you alive, but that's just not what you want. You want to put that in writing in that living will. And then what was the other one? So HIPAA authorization, and then also a medical power of attorney where parents can come into the hospital and make medical decisions on your behalf. So before any of you all go off to your respective careers or schools, etc., make sure you have those four documents in place.
Absolutely. Well, again, we just thank you so much. This is one of the most informative sessions we've ever had for this class, and I just thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
And I'm definitely going to send my DMV business owners your way, just in case they need to take care of this, because DMV is where it's at right now for so many small black business
Yes,
owners. So definitely going
happen.
to send them your way. So again, we thank you so much for joining us, Leah Boston, owner of Leah Boston Law, all the way in College Park, Maryland. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day. All right.
All right, talk to you soon, buddy.